This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason: to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Shafer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. I want to thank Campaign Sidekick for supporting this podcast and helping make it possible. To find out more about how they can revolutionize your campaign and help you win, go to campaignsidekick.vote and find out more. You can schedule a demo, you can check out the product, and it's fantastic. I absolutely love it and have been part of helping build it over the years, and they do great work. This week, guys, I'm just going to be talking to you for a little bit, maybe a little bit shorter than normal, but there were a couple things that I've been thinking about for the last week that I feel are really important and that don't get talked about enough in campaigns. And so I wanted to kind of run you through some of my thoughts. So today will be a monologue podcast that I hope you guys will enjoy. And we'll get back to the interviews next week. I'm going to be talking to Representative Matt Rinaldi, a good friend of mine that actually exemplifies a number of the lessons that we're talking about here today. But a couple things we're going to be talking about is, one, we're going to be talking about the importance of building a brain's trust and what that means as far as having trusted men and women around you who can build you up, that can invest in you, and that can also be there to call you out and help keep you on the right path. That's something that I've learned a lot about over the years, and I've always had a really strong core group around me. And so I know a little bit of something about it. I know a lot of the mistakes those have helped me from and keep me out of, and I think it's really especially important for candidates. The second is going to be looking at money and how you personally manage money is a big factor in you running for office, whether you should, and how you do so, and how you're taking care of your money to make sure that you're in a strong position leading up to that campaign and throughout it to keep you successful and happy and keep your relationships healthy. And then third, we're going to talk about our hierarchy of duties and why it's important to do what's right, not just what's liked, and about the problems that people fall into when they start looking at their lives as a popularity contest rather than a situation where they're supposed to be doing the right thing every time. So on the first one, looking at the importance of a brain trust, you may have read some things the last year. A lot of research has been coming about the isolation of the American male. And it doesn't. You can just Google that, and you'll have plenty of articles. But one of the things that we've seen is over the last decade or so, really, and especially even longer out than that, as communication has got so much easier, especially via email, and our society has got a whole lot more spread out, and we have so many people moving around all the time. Relationships are handled a lot more on Facebook than they are in person these days, or even on the phone. And I know that it's something that my relationships have suffered from. I've realized recently how little time I spend cultivating one-on-one time with people, and I use Facebook or text messaging as a shortcut. And that's frankly embarrassing because I've got a lot of awesome, great friends and a lot of great people, but I think I let myself feel like I'm cultivating relationships with them when I'm liking on their Facebook posts or I'm shooting the text message, say happy birthday, when in reality, there's a bigger investment that's needed. And I can't expect those relationships to be growing and for me to be getting stronger or my friends to be getting stronger if that's my level of investment. So a couple of things that I've done throughout my life to help keep that from happening or make sure that I'm building relationships that are strong, that are real friendships, not just a bunch of acquaintances that like my stuff on Facebook, is one, I've been very blessed from an early age to have a great core group of guy friends. First of all, my biological brothers are rock stars and guys that I spend a lot of time around and with and on the phone. One of them is a partner of mine in business stuff. Another is just a good friend and confidant. We've always been really close. We're homeschooled and spend a lot of time around each other, and we're really each other's best friends growing up. And sometimes worst enemies, but that's another story. And thankfully, now today, we're all very close. I got one brother lives about half a mile from me. The other is actually living with him, so they're both pretty close. And, right before we record this podcast, I spent about an hour and a half on the phone with one of them, just talking about stuff and encouraging each other and helping give each other advice. And I can't put into words how powerful that is and how blessed I am to have that. In addition to my biological brothers, I grew up with a number of guys that have been friends of mine since an early age. One guy's a dentist, and one of my best friends in college. He's gonna be a firefighter. He's been doing all kinds of different work the last few years. I mean, just blessed with a bunch of people from throughout my past. Folks like Luke Macias, that is a previous guest on the podcast, and Drew Ryan that are core guys. I mean, these are guys that stood up at my wedding, and these are folks that I know. They know me, and they know what I care about, and they know what I want to be. And so they're guys that are able to encourage me and build me up. And they're also guys that, have on multiple occasions told me, hey, dude, you're not doing the right thing here. Or you kind of got your head up your butt, pull it out. Let's get back on the right path. And those relationships are reciprocal. They're open to that kind of criticism as well. And we look out for each other. I think a lot of guys, and I'm assuming this is similar for women, but I don't have that personal experience. I know for guys, many times those fall prey to distance and lack of communication. And I've had those relationships in the past that have, as time goes by and you don't get time around them, they kind of shrivel up and they die, as those kind of relationships often do. But if we keep investing in them, they're just so incredibly valuable. The other thing that I've done is through a mastermind group. It's called Iron Sharpens Iron. You can go to viewfromthetop.com is the website for it. And Aaron Walker, a friend of Dave Ramsey's and a great mentor of mine, he started this group of masterminds about 4 years ago, and I joined him very early on. And we built a community of men. This one is exclusively for men, where we're about leading successful, significant lives. And most of us are business owners or have the idea that we want to become business owners. Our Christians are mostly conservative. We got a couple liberals in there, which God love them. And the idea is that we're able to, because we know that we have the same things that we want to be as far as the type of men we want to be, good dads, good husbands, principled leaders in business and in our private lives. We have a common ethos. And as a result, we're able to hold each other accountable and able to encourage each other. And this last weekend, I'm recording this on the 10th. This last weekend, we have twice a year we have a meetup where we all get together out near Nashville, and we spend a weekend together and get to spend a whole lot of time. So we had about 100 guys out there, 80 or 100, something like that. Many, about 10 of whom are in my group, and the rest are in other groups that meet throughout the week. And we got to spend a ton of time together, and I can't describe how awesome it was. And that's a unique setting. And if you guys are interested in joining, check them out. It's great. But the idea there is that it's an intentional group of people who have similar goals as far as the kind of men they want to be. And we get together and we encourage each other. And that can be replicated in person. It can be replicated virtually. But it's the type of thing that I think that more people need to take advantage of, whatever the brand name on it, because I know the kind of help that I've got from it. I mean, I'm in a group with people. Their incomes range widely. Their ages range widely. We've got a guy that's on Fox News all the time. We got a guy that's owns a franchise company. We got a guy that's a major equipment and just civil engineering guy, all from all over the map. One guy does websites. I do politics. We got a whole lot of different people, and you'd see us walking in the street and not see a thing similar about us. You have multiple races and all kinds of stuff, but when you get us in that group together, we're focused on each other and helping bringing problems to the group, talking about what we believe in, what we're struggling with, what we're happy about and excited. So we're sharing wins, we're sharing struggles, and it's a safe place where we get to go and work with other guys to build each other up and make each other better. And I think whatever format that takes for you, you need to do something like that. And so whether that's a couple close friends or just one, where you're asking each other tough questions, you're encouraging people, and you know each other's the weaknesses and the strengths, and can help magnify the strengths and minimize weaknesses, that's of critical importance. And when you get into politics, when we see people fall from grace in politics, typically it happens catastrophically. And it's typically as a result of problems that, if caught early, could have been totally mitigated. And I think about people like Mark Sanford, who has regained a measure of political power as far as being a congressman now, but he was governor and ended up falling out of grace and reputationally hurting himself badly because of an affair he had and literally disappearing to like Argentina or something. And we look at some of the congressmen that have resigned or got kicked out of office recently because of affairs or sexual harassment or financial misconduct, people getting literally kicked out of the president's cabinet over not being smart about how they were dealing with taxpayer money. These are all things that come down to character problems. And in most cases, their friends and family weren't aware. Well, I know for me that the type of guys that I'm around, they could tell if something was off like that. They would be watching what I'm doing close enough that they'd be able to help kind of pull me back from that if I was ever tempted in those ways. And that gives me a lot of internal strength because I know that I have guys watching out for me. And I know that temptations are real and that I'm going to fail through life. But I know that I've also got guys that love me. I've got men and women who are around me that care enough about me to say and to when I'm doing something wrong and to watch to make sure that I'm staying on the right path. And that's not out of a lack of trust for myself. That's because I trust them so much. And so whatever form that takes, I think that you need to be cultivating that in your own life. That's going to extend to the kitchen cabinet that you have in your campaign. Some of those people, it may not be a totally overlapping Venn diagram, probably not. Maybe I'd even go so far as to say it shouldn't be. But those are you need to have some of those type people who are advising you during the campaign. They make sure you're not becoming somebody else or really losing who you are as you try to become a candidate. You need somebody that's going to say, look, kind of pull that ego back a notch. Or, you know what, 6 months ago before you started running for office and thinking you're Mr. Popular, you would not have done or said that. And that's really important. If you don't have that, if you don't have people that are looking at you in that way, then more often than not, you're going to find yourself slipping and doing things and saying things you shouldn't do. They may not be objectively wrong or criminal or unethical, but it's a slow slide. And I've seen far too many people that get elected to office that slide down there. It can be as simple as having an unchecked ego. And you have a lot of people around you that all of a sudden start thinking you're special and telling you that. And maybe you are. That's cool. I'd love for you to be special. That's what my mom always told me that I was. But you need people that help hold you to a stronger standard. The last piece of that in my mind is to make sure you have really strong spousal communication, because your spouse should be, if you're married, should be your strongest ally in this pursuit. I mentioned plenty of times that I will never work with a candidate whose spouse is not strongly on board. That doesn't mean they're out there block walking every day. It doesn't mean they should even show up at all on the campaign trail. But at least behind the scenes, they need to be 100% in your corner and want to see you win. They want to see you do this. I was actually shared the story of a guy that was he was very influential in his community. Thankfully, in the last many years, he's really changed his life around. But there was a point when he was very influential, and everybody thought highly of him. And he and his wife were having some problems, and she wasn't happy with what he had done, who he'd become. And there was this person that came up, and with the two of them staying there, husband and wife, was talking about, man, you're so awesome, you're just great, and just really talking about how great this guy was. And as this person walked away, the wife turned to him and said, yep, he doesn't know you the way I do. And as it should, it cut the guy to the core, because there was such a disharmony between that public appearance and what it looked like on the outside and who he was on the inside, and how what he was in that intimate relationship with his wife, that he couldn't fool her, but he could fool the world. And that's something that happens in politics a lot. And I think that you need to focus so much on that spousal relationship in the days leading up to a campaign as well as during it, because it's not something you can put on autopilot. You can't just say, okay, babe, I'll be back once this campaign's over. It's not a deployment. You're still at home. You're still around your family. You're still loving them and taking care of them. And then they're still your highest duty, which we'll come back to here on my last topic. And so if you can't take care of your family, you got no business running for political office. You really need to make sure that they're taken care of first. And the first key to that is making sure that you have strong spousal communication. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I've always been, it's always been recommended to me that I take advantage of is just counseling. I think that while there's, oftentimes a great stigma that people say, oh, they're going to counseling, they're going to have big problems. One of my mentors, he goes, at least quarterly, he and his wife go, rain or shine, no matter how good or bad they feel like they're doing together, and get that counseling, to get that feedback. And my wife and I do something very similar, because it's always really good. It's kind of like we go to the doctor for a well check every year. It's not because we think we got cancer or our head's falling off or we got a big gash on our leg. It's because we don't want to get there. We don't want to have problems pop up. And so it may not be for everybody, but Christian counseling, I think, is a great way, especially as a preventative medicine, as you're going on the campaign trail, that deserves some consideration. Now, moving on from relationships and marriage and the idea of a brain's trust, I want to talk a little bit about money. When I was first starting to date my wife, it became clear to me early on that she had not had really good examples of men handling money in her life. And I prayed a lot about it, because something that was really important to me was that I did not want to have separate finances in marriage. I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey, and one of the things he always talks about is not having escape hatches. And he sees having separate bank accounts and his, mine, and ours type money situation as a really bad signal. It means that you don't trust each other with your money. So how can you trust each other with your lives? and really look at a long-term relationship. And that always meant a lot to me. It's something my dad and my parents and my grandparents really hammered home. And so as we were talking to now my wife was, hesitant to do that, and expressed early on that was a concern of hers. It really became something I felt God tell me, look, you need to just lead by example. Don't tell her you're good with money and that you're going to have to do this. This is a condition of marrying me. Show her that you're actually somebody that manages money well. And so from early on in our relationship, I made a practice of not just living for, within my means, but being on a written budget and being very careful about how I was spending my money. Telling her if we needed to change our date night because I was getting low on money that I had allocated for that, or whatever it might be. Making sure I wasn't being too overly extravagant or spending money I didn't have. Those are all things that I kept in the front of my mind. And not only did they help really give her confidence in my fiduciary responsibility, and that I could plan, and that I could make sure we were going to run out of money as well as I was trying to earn it, but it built a good discipline. And I was when I came out of college, I was blessed to come out with no debt, except for transition expenses, getting an apartment set up and stuff like that. And I really worked hard in those months after graduating to pay that off and get in the black. And after I did, I kind of went off a written budget not too long afterwards. And for quite a while, just, I didn't spend more than I made, and I saved a little bit, but I wasn't on the written budget. And so I got back on that when my wife and I were first dating, and, still maintain one to this date. I use a website called youneedabudget.com, which I highly recommend. It's great for personal finances. And even for some, you could probably use it for campaign budgeting if you wanted to. But it's a great service that helps me keep track of my money and to budget that wisely and help save up for things. And like I said, I use it every day. But in my mind, if you can't keep your own house in order, whether it's relationally or financially, then you don't have any business running for political office, because why should I trust you with my money or greater authority if you can't exercise the authority and resource that you have currently to a good degree? If you can't do a good job with those, why should I to give you responsibility over more? This is not a good place for me to put you if you can't handle your own current responsibilities. So that's part of why I think bankruptcies and those kind of things look bad for candidates. There are plenty of reasons for bankruptcies, and they're not all disqualifying, but I'd a whole lot rather a candidate without one, all things other being equal. And I think that when you look at personal finances, if you're doing a good job of managing your finances, that tells me you're responsible in a very, very good way, especially when you look at the amount of debt people have these days and how many people are getting their homes foreclosed on for not paying, just across the board. Americans are terrible at finances right now, probably worse than I can recall ever reading about in our history. So you want to be on a written budget. That's just so important to me. You got to know where your money's coming from, where it's going, and how much is going where. If you don't, you're not doing a good job of managing it. It doesn't matter how much you've got, how much you save. That's a judgment that I make on you. If you're not doing that, you're not being disciplined in that regard. And so I highly recommend you get there. I'll tell you that also when it comes to your marriage relationship, if you're married, that when you look at the reasons why people get divorced, the several of the studies I've looked at have shown that people get divorced more often as a result of financial disagreements and financial problems than infidelity. Actually, a pretty small number these days of people actually get divorced and specify infidelity as the reason. But it's actually a lot higher when you start injecting, especially early in a relationship, you got financial problems and arguments. So, when my dad told me that, when I was growing up, the message that I took out of it was, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I don't put myself in morally compromising positions where I'm tempted to cheat on my wife. So as much as I work there, I need to work as harder at making sure that we don't have financial problems, that my wife knows that I'm being responsible, that I'm being disciplined, and that I'm looking out for our future. And so as a candidate, when you're looking at your race and whether you run, this financial state of your family should be very, very, probably at the top of your concern list. And so being on a budget, communicating effectively about your finances with your spouse, and making sure that you're in a solid position is really critical there. Especially when it comes to, whether your boss is on board with you running, whether you have to quit, whether you'll make money in your new job if you get that. All these things should factor into your decision making when it comes to, is this a good time for me to run? Because if you're in a lot of debt or you're struggling financially and you're already having arguments about finances and how you spend money or how little you have, it's probably not a good time, no matter how likely you think it is that you could be elected. Because if you get elected to a job and your financial problems only linger or grow worse, then that's a pretty good way to win a campaign but lose your marriage. And that's never a trade-off I'm willing to make. I think it also comes down to kind of this hierarchy of duties we're going to discuss in a moment, where you're putting your desire to serve your state or your city or your country above serving your spouse, and that's getting everything all out of whack. So get on a written budget, read some Dave Ramsey books, and make sure that you're on the same page financially with your spouse. Because if you do those things, first of all, you're going to look on the outside like a candidate that I want to support a lot more than somebody who's not doing those things. I think that it helps align that a lot more closely with what I believe and what I want to do. And so that's going to be something I want to see in elected officials. But it also means you're probably more likely to be a good fiduciary of the resources that you're managing as an elected official, because you understand how to be disciplined personally. So that's likely to carry over into your political life as well. All right, so it seems really easy. It seems honestly trite to say, do what's right, not what's liked. But man, I can't tell you how many times I look at what politicians do, and it drives me nuts because it's clear they're not doing what they actually think is right. They're doing what they think will get them the most popularity. And some of them maybe have really good motives of saying, well, if I'm liked, maybe that'll increase the possibility that I'll have power or that I'll be able to stay in office longer. And so if I compromise a little bit on this thing right now and don't do what I think is the right thing to go along, maybe you'll make some friends and I can be a more effective legislator or councilman or whatever. And that's just a bunch of BS. An example comes to mind recently where a guy that I've actually worked with in the past, he's on a city council, and there's a bond package that was coming up. And so he voted with the rest of the council as the sole vote to put this on the ballot and let the voters decide. Now, that rubs me wrong so many different ways. First and foremost, if you disagree with putting the bond up and you think it's a bad financial decision for the city, then you need to use every procedural means at your disposal to kill it. And that means voting against it, voting against putting on the ballot, voting to kill it there. Even if you know that you'll be the 1 out of 9 that votes against it. If you think it's a bad idea for the city, don't put it up for a vote. Work to kill it there. Use every procedural means at your disposal to kill that thing. Second, it really limits your credibility if you're actually against it, and you should come out to campaign against it down the line when it's on the ballot. If you voted for it, well, why the heck would you vote for something you thought was a bad idea? It's a pretty simple and straightforward question. But it even gets worse when you understand a little bit about how electoral stuff works here in Texas when it comes to municipal elections and bond packages. Fact is that hardly any bond packages fail at the ballot box because very few people show up to vote, and the vast majority of the people that show up to vote are older and they have less of a concern about bond packages, and a large percentage are made up of folks who directly benefit by being city employees or school employees. So they just vote for any bond package because it's going to mean more money for the city or the school district, and so that they see that as a general good for themselves, and the city and school board push that among their employees. So if you know the thing is going to pass if it's put on the ballot, and you're against it, but you vote for it, I mean, how many different ways is that wrong? That's just stupid. So that's just one example of somebody, and who knows if he was lying to me, but if you take him at his word that he was against it, then why would he vote for it? And it's just stupid. So if we see something is wrong, we got to work against it. And in the podcast next week, we talk with Representative Matt Rinaldi. And we'll talk about an example of something they did in the state house this last year that I thought was fantastic that a lot of people hated, but they got some good things done out of it. And there's this thing called the local and consent calendar, which is largely made up of, it's pretty much exclusively made up of stuff that nobody is against. Everybody, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, they're all for. And at the very last day of the session, there were a bunch of bills that needed to get passed. Some were sunset bills. They just had to get done. And if they didn't get passed on local consent, then they couldn't end the session or they have to come back for a special. So there were a whole lot of bills that the speaker and the calendars committee had bottled up that they weren't going to let out. A bunch of stuff that the grassroots had been begging for and demanding for a long time, and that they had the bills. They knew they had the votes on the floor for them, but the leadership would not let these bills come to the floor for a vote. And so they had them in a chokehold. Well, they had one move left, that there was no way that they could put pressure on these guys to let these bills out of committee. They had a very limited time window left, and so they had one play. That was frankly shoot the hostage. They went out and they killed the entire local and consent calendar. It was 100-some bills that were all on there that were getting pushed through at the very end, and they killed the entire thing. Now, that ticked a lot of people off. There were a lot of people that thought they were just doing it to be spiteful. There were some people that thought they were just mad and hadn't been able to get their bills passed. They were just doing anything they could. And some people thought it was just a poor strategic move. But the reality of it was that they had been working to pressure leadership to let these bills have a vote. Let them see the light of day and see what happens. If they're voted down, okay, but at least give them a chance. And they had a limited time frame. So what they did, they put them out there, and they wanted to have them put out there, and leadership said no. They said, well, we're gonna kill the entire local and consent calendar unless you let a couple of these out. And leadership said, no, you won't. And so I said, okay, well, you're calling our bluff. We'll show you. And so they killed the entire local consent calendar. It did force a special session, and then they were able to actually get a lot of these things passed and actually picked up a lot of yardage and made the people that elected them very, very happy because they did what it took. They made the unpopular move that ticked some people off, but they got done what they were elected to do. Now, they were responding to their hierarchy of duties because as an elected official, your primary elected duty is to your constituents. It's not to leadership, not to your party. It's to your constituents. And so the only thing that supersedes that is your personal beliefs, your personal convictions, because you're representing them. Don't do something that is contrary to your personal beliefs. I'm not going to, if I knew that 51% of my voters were pro-choice and I'm pro-life, I'm not going to vote for a pro-choice bill in spite of that. They can choose to fire me, but I'm not going to breach my own principles. So you got your personal principles, and then you've got your duty to your constituents. And these guys were doing what their constituents sent them there to do. They said, look, my constituents desperately want us to pass these bills, and I need to be able to tell them that I did everything possible to get it up there, to get it voted on, and then let the chips fall where they may. And so if it takes killing this local consent calendar, have them come back to work another month of the summer, okay, so be it. I tried to do it another way, but you wouldn't let me. Another example that comes to mind is Jim Ryan, one of our previous guests on the podcast, my old boss, Drew Ryan's dad. There was a time when he was in Congress back in about 2006, and I can't read the exact reason, but I think it was Medicare Part D or something like that. And President Bush, Republican president, a guy that I like in a lot of ways and dislike in others, he was whipping hard to get votes for this Medicare Part D expansion, I think it was. And Jim was in his office one evening, and it was coming up near time to vote. The vote may have even been open at the time. And he gets a call, says, hey, hold for President Bush. And President Bush talked to him for a few minutes, and Representative Ryan, he laid out why he couldn't vote for it. He said, Mr. President, I got a lot of respect for you, and on any areas where we agree, I'm more than happy to work with you. I'm not opposed to compromise, but I think this is a bad bill. I think this is something that we should not let pass. I think it's a bad idea. And given that, I don't see a way that I can vote for it, and I'm sorry. And the president once again asked for his vote, tried to talk him into it, and at the end of the day, Representative Ryan just told him, I can't. This is not fit with the principles that I hold, and I don't believe that my constituents will be happy with this. This is not a bill that I believe is good. Now, as you can imagine, that did not do him any favors, the White House, but he got to know that he did the right thing, and he worked hard for his constituents and did what he believed they sent him there to do. He didn't compromise and vote for a bill that he knew to be bad just because the president asked him to. And that was the opposite reaction that a lot of other people had. That's why the bill passed, is because there were a lot of Republicans that bent to the president's request. And some of them may have thought it was a good idea. I'm sure many of them did. But there were others who were going to vote the other way, and just because and they thought it was a bad idea, but just because the president said, hey, will you help me out, they went with him. And that kind of what we call log rolling is very popular. It's the whole, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And there's a place for that. There's some times when that's helpful, but you should never, if you believe something is wrong, you shouldn't let somebody talk you into it just because you think it's going to help make you more popular, or that people are going to all of a sudden like you more, just because you compromise. The fact is that, one, they usually don't. Because just like with somebody who shares a secret or turns traitor, they may be talked into it and promised all kinds of things. But the fact is that if I've talked you into being a traitor, and you turn on your friends to help me out, I still know that you're a traitor. And when we're dealing in the future, I'm going to assume that you're doing the same thing to me and that you'll turn on me someday. So you're not really buying friends. You're not really gaining relationships. you're just showing your true character. And that's known. People will always know that about you now. So don't compromise that. A lot of it in my mind comes down to a hierarchy of duties. And you hear people talk about, God, family, country, as far as what matters most to them. It's actually not a bad way to look at the way a hierarchy of duties really goes. In my mind, first and foremost, that means that I'm not going to do something that my family might want me to do, or might seem like a short-term payoff as far as how it affects my family, or even potentially saves my marriage, if I see in the Bible and I believe that God's told me not to. I'm not going to break one of the 10 commandments just because my wife says, thank God she never do this, but if she said, do this, or break this commandment, or it's over, I believe that's a hierarchy of duties there, and I'm not going to breach my faith and my convictions as far as my God and what He's asked me to do to serve any earthly relationship. It's just not what I'm going to do. And second to that means that when it comes to my family, I'm not going to do something in the service of my country that I believe or any of my fellow man that I believe is going to harm my family. And that's one of those things where, if there's a shooting that's going on and I'm there and I have a choice between saving my son Stoney or saving someone else, the fact is I want to make sure my son is taken care of or my wife's taken care of before I look to anyone else's safety, including my own. And while I'd be willing to sacrifice my own safety to save others, I'm not willing to sacrifice theirs, because they're the people God's given me to take care of. So whatever you're doing, whatever political aims you have, God and family come above that. And that's a hierarchy that I think most conservatives would say they would give lip service and agreeing with. But too many then turn around and do things either the Bible says are wrong or that are to the detriment of their family. And you can point to obvious things like affairs and stuff like that, but I'd say that even goes so far as to putting yourself in a bad financial position that jeopardizes your family's security and happiness in order to seek a political office. Or you're not spending enough time with your spouse or with your kids because you're out there on the road all the time. When I think about those kind of things, I think about my buddy Matt Krause, a state rep here in Texas. And he's on the road a ton. He does a great job as a state legislator, and he has young kids and a wonderful wife. But he gets home just every weekend during session to spend time with his family. And he plans out his holidays and family schedule and stuff. And he blocks off days on his calendar, a lot of them, and says, there's nothing political that goes here. And he says, this is a family day. I'm going to be at my son's baseball game. This is the day that I'm going to. I one time asked him to do an event. I was scheduling about 9 months out. And I called him and said, hey, Matt, I'd love for you to come and speak at this event. It's a pretty big deal. And he said, man, I'm sorry, I can't. And I was like, dude, what do you have on your calendar 9 months from now that's not negotiable? And he's like, man, that weekend where my family's going on vacation, it's blocked off. It's not negotiable. Another example, it's not political, was guy Dan Miller, who's a pretty well-known author and has done a bunch of mastermind stuff. He was actually was asked to come speak at an event that I was at, or going to be at, and he said, the guy called him up and said, hey, Dan, how about Friday? We'd love you to come speak to these guys on Friday night. It's like, sorry, man, I can't. I got a prior commitment. And it turns out every Friday night, non-negotiable, that's his date night with his wife. And that's something they've had set out in stone for a long time. And he always holds to that. He doesn't put anything on Friday night. That's his time with his wife. And so he came on Saturday and spoke, but he said, I can't do Friday. And it may seem like a small thing to a lot of folks to move that around, but for he and his wife, that was non-negotiable for them. And that was a way of him showing how much he respected his wife, because he kept that commitment. That was a pre-existing commitment in his life with his wife. And so he wasn't going to break that. So I think that when we look at those situations, we need to really keep that hierarchy of duties in the front of our mind's eye, because if we lose sight of that, even in the small things, then we're going to run into problems. Another thing Matt Krause does is every time we get together for breakfast, we normally go to some place that serves pancakes. And the first thing he does is sit down. He actually doesn't drink coffee. I order coffee, and he orders a big stack of pancakes and asks him to hold them, to make them until he gets the check. And we always go really early in the morning. We meet about 6:30, so that by breakfast time, when his kids are getting ready for breakfast and getting ready for school, he can be home with a warm stack of pancakes, and he can be home to spend some time with them. That's an example of the small things, right? That's not a big deal. But it's one way he shows them how much they matter in his life, that he puts them first. He puts them above politics, above friendships with me and others, and above relationships that are going to serve as any that might serve as political ends. If you're not looking out for those hierarchy of duties and the small things, you're going to have a really tough time when it comes to the big ones. And you got to build a pattern there, because if you let yourself compromise on the small things, then eventually you build up an insensitivity to it. And so when it comes to the bigger things, you're like, well, there'll be a trade-off. Yeah, I'm fine with doing this, even though my wife doesn't want me to, or even though she's asked for me to block this day off, or to put my phone down after 9 o'clock or whatever, because you know what? Once I get to the governor's mansion, or once I get elected to Congress, she's really going to like that life, or we're going to make more money someday and she'll be happy with that. The fact is, it's a really good recipe for coming home one day and finding nobody there, or at the very least, even in, whether it's worse or not, I don't know, but coming home and finding that you've lost your relationship and your wife doesn't respect you anymore, or your kids don't know who you are because you've said time and time again through small things that you don't matter to them. I know this has kind of been a rant, but I really had these things on my mind for the last couple weeks, because I just feel like every time I look at Twitter or I turn on the news, I see people that are breaking these rules, people that I generally assume, or in many cases I know to be, good people, but they're not doing the right thing. And you guys as listeners, my hope is the whole idea of this podcast and what I do is to educate and inspire principled individuals to run for office and help make a political impact. And so I believe very deeply that if we're not living our lives this way, then we're not going to do a good job, and we're not going to have that net political impact we want to, because we're not living our lives right. If I'm not right with my God, if I'm not right with my family, I think the chances of me having a big impact on my country are pretty darn low. And in many ways, I think the biggest impact that any of us can have on our country is through the way that we live our lives, because most of us are never going to be elected to political office. Most of you all that are listening have even no desire to run for political office yourselves. Maybe just want to help some people. So I think that the legacy we leave is so much more important than the political office we held. That's not what's going to be remembered about us. It's going to be how we treated our friends, how we treated our family, and how we acted if we followed the commands of our God. And so, pretty much every other week we talk about politics, and we may have some more of these monologues at some point, but I kind of want to take a break for a minute and just talk about how we're supposed to live our lives, because if you don't do that right, then I don't think you're going to have the long-term impact you want to, even if it seems like a shortcut. Like I said, next week we're going to be back talking with Representative Matt Rinaldi. We recorded the episode earlier today. It's fresh in my mind. It's a fantastic background into him. He ran for office once and he lost. He ran again and he won and learned a ton of great lessons. His consultant was a previous guest of ours, Luke Macias, and he's good friends with Matt Krause and Jonathan Sticklin that we've had on the podcast before, as well as folks like Connie Burton. And I've known Matt for good long time, probably since like 2012, I think. So you guys are really going to enjoy that, and I'm working to get us some more great interviews lined up in the near future. Hope you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you all again very soon.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from my campaign coach.